Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cannon Puncture Show. This is another in our ongoing series of Game Advocates episodes. Now, what's a Game Advocates episode? Glad you asked. So in Game Advocates, what I do is I bring on someone who is an avid fan or advocate, what may have you, a person who has played a particular tabletop RPG to its fullest with lots of groups, lots of people, and really is passionate about why this game is awesome. Now, they are not here to sell the game. They didn't make the game, but they sure will probably want to play the game with you. And also, we'll even get into why it might not be the game for you. So I am happy to bring on Adam Kobel of Sage Kobold Productions. How you doing, Adam?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Well, thanks for coming on. So you are here to talk to me about something about burning bears, right? Is that the game, some kind of bear burning?
Yeah, torch bears. Yeah, it's a good game.
Torching bears. All right. So what the heck is this thing?
So the game that I'm here to advocate today is Torchbearer. It's a game by Thor and Luke over at Burning Wheel headquarters. It's a dungeon crawl fantasy adventure game, but it takes a little bit of a different spin on the traditional model.
Okay, what makes it different?
Well, so in Dungeons and Dragons, let's say, you know, there's this broad kind of family tree of games that spawned off of it. If we look at like OD&D as our originator, and we've got our AD&Ds and our basic D&Ds and our third editions and our Pathfinders and all the myriad of millions of games that have come from it. What Torchbearer does is it picks a specific point in that tree. It looks at basic Dungeons and Dragons, the sort of Moldvay, level 1 to 5 D&D, and says, all right, we're going to take the stuff from this game that they just didn't do well at all, the stuff people throw out every time they play it. So things like tracking turns, light sources, rations. They take all that stuff that everybody usually ignores in D&D and they make a game out of it. So Torchbearer is really on the surface, it's that dungeon crawl game. You play elves and dwarves and wizards and stuff, and you have gear and you go into a dungeon, you fight monsters and you get treasure. But what the game's really about is how totally awful and shitty it would be to be an adventurer. It's about the survival horror of being in an enclosed space several miles underground with people you don't really trust, surrounded by monsters that are trying to kill you, and you're running out of food, and you only got one torch left. And it's about making that decision to press on and try and get one more bag of copper coins before you go home, or bailing out like a wimp and going home and trying to make do in town with what you got.
Wow. Okay. All right. So you already compared it to D&D and all that, but I've heard that there's this crappy little hack of Apocalypse World called Dungeon World. Why don't you just play that, dude?
Well, I mean, you should play Dungeon World. You should definitely buy many copies of it and play it. But if you chose not to, if Dungeon World wasn't your thing, the thing about Torchbearer, and this is something that kind of happened by accident, is that Torchbearer and Dungeon World are like Siamese twins that got separated right after they were born, in that Dungeon World as a game tends to be more about like player-driven fiction and making up cool stories with your friends, and the rules are just there to help you move that story along. And it's not about the nitty-gritty details, right? We hand-wave a lot of stuff in Dungeon World, but in Torchbearer, there's no hand-waving. You don't get to pretend like some of the stuff doesn't matter, right? Torchbearer is about the fine details. It's about the grind. And Torchbearer is, I hate to define games on the scale of gameness, but Torchbearer is way more of a game than Dungeon World is. There's a lot of intricate pieces that go together, a lot of different gears that work together as one big system. So, Torchbearer is a game that you'd want to play if you're interested in doing a dungeon crawl, but you want to play a game that's going to challenge you. You want a game that's going to kick your ass the first time you play it, because you can get better at Torchbearer. Like, there are people, I'm better at this game now, like unequivocally more skilled at playing Torchbearer now than I was a year ago, right? You can watch your players get better. They learn the tricks of the game, they figure out the mechanics, and they know how to play. And that's something that I think really appeals to a certain variety of player, right? Is that it's about that challenge. It's about the slog. Right? You really do have to come up against the system, learn how it works, and then come out the other end alive. So they're similar in the way that they're both telling stories about fantasy adventure and dungeon crawling and stuff, but the way they get at those stories, the way that you come out the other end is very, very different.
So when someone sits down to play Torchbearer and makes a joke about burning bears, and then they're done with that, what are they actually doing? Like, what do you do? I've heard that like the character sheet has pictures of torches, and you literally mark them off. Is that seriously? Like, is that what you're doing?
So
what do you do in this game?
I mean, in Torchbearer, you're doing the same thing you do in every role-playing game, right? Like if you're the GM, you're talking about the situation the players are in. You're describing where they're at, the putting challenges in front of them for them to overcome, and adjudicating the rules, deciding how difficult their actions are going to be. And it's the same stuff. There's a different set of rules, but you're basically doing the same thing. And as a player, it's the same, right? You're coming up against monsters and dangers and stuff, and you're trying to overcome it using the skills your character has and the skills that you as a player have in knowing what rules to use and when. But the actual mechanics of the game, Torchbearer is derived from Mouse Guard, which is derived from Burning Wheel, and so it's a D6 based die pool system. The characters have skills that range between unskilled and 5 and 6 dice. And you're building up a pool of dice to try and overcome the obstacles that the GM is putting in front of you. But as you're doing that, like in Burning Wheel, that's pretty much the game. There are a lot of intricate subsystems. You move from one system to another. But in Torchbearer, you're doing the adventure phase where the GM's beating up on you so that you can advance, you can get treasure, and you're earning checks, which are sort of your currency, so that when you get to the camp phase, you can fix all the bad things that happened to you during the adventure phase. So, like you said, you're tracking torchlight, but because it actually matters, because the better lit you are, the easier it is to overcome those obstacles, right? It's mechanically harder in the game to do anything in the dark than it is with some light. Right? The game's not called Torchbearer for no reason. And every 4 turns that you play, every 4 turns during the adventure phase, your characters suffer from what's called the grind. So the longer you go without resting, the shittier circumstances get for you. You start off fresh, which means you're ready to roll. You get bonuses to your actions. You're feeling good, and then on the end of the 4th turn, you're hungry and thirsty. And if you don't fix that, by the end of the next 4 turns, you're exhausted. Then you get angry. Then you get afraid. Then you get sick. And this is the only game I've ever played in the dungeon crawl genre or any other genre where if you just don't do anything but continue to try and advance forward, your character will just die of exhaustion. By the end of the adventure phase, if you just keep going and you don't camp, your character drops dead. So there's a timer set on the game that keeps the pace really really exciting, keeps it kind of electric.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Well, let's say we're actually sitting down to play this, and I, as you can tell, have no idea what the heck I'm doing. What would you warn me about, Adam?
I would say this game, like in general as a warning, Torchbearer, it's a game you either kind of have to be all brand new to and willing to screw it up the first couple of times you play. Like, there's a learning curve. It's not a difficult game to play, but if you've ever read any of Luke and Thor's games, it's one thing to read the book, right? They're really good at writing clear rules that make sense, but till the rubber hits the road, till you actually play the game, you don't have that context. So I'd be wary of starting it brand new with a bunch of people who've never played before. Be patient with yourselves. You're going to screw it up. It's fine. Don't worry about it. The other thing that you can do is if you know someone who's already played it before, make them the GM and then learn from that first couple of sessions. Most of my experience playing Torchbearer is both as the GM and as the only one who's ever played. And generally in that model, by the time you get to the 5th or 6th turn, people are starting to get it. And you can kind of see how they're picking that stuff up. They're starting to put the pieces together. So don't be discouraged, I guess, would be the advice that I've got. Also, you kind of have to be a masochist to enjoy Torchbearer. Like, if you want your character to be the special princess of her own story, that's great, but Torchbearer might not be the game for you because pretty soon that elf princess is going to have her dress covered in mud and she's going to be up to her ankles in blood and there's suffering that's going to happen to your character. So you kind of have to be a little bit masochistic about how your character exists, about not protecting them from the bad stuff that's going to happen to them.
So you're saying I probably should not be making a dark elf with twin scimitars, kind of probably a bad idea.
Hey man, if that's mechanically the way you want to go, and if it's gonna work for you, go for it. I know Jared made a really cool optional dark elf class, and I don't know if one scimitar is better than two. You got to use that other hand to hold the torch. Limited inventory slots, man.
Nice. Okay. Well, hit me with some highlights, man. What are some of your favorite moments at the table?
For me, it's the beautiful sadism of being the GM in this game. There's a reason that I don't play Torchbearer that much. I like inflicting suffering on players. So for me, it's like I run an adventure at cons that is essentially it's set in like a lost cache of treasure for this pirate hid away in a soggy cave. But every time I've ever run the adventure, the hardest thing to overcome is a rusty ladder. Like, I've watched entire parties run themselves to nothing trying to get up a ladder. And what's really great for me is seeing them figure out that there are mechanical ways to sort of cheat this game. Like, I compare Torchbearer to Dark Souls a lot, the PC or PS3 game, because the way to win at those games is to leverage the system in a way that maybe the GM doesn't expect. So, there's obstacles put in front of you, and if you can find a way to not engage that obstacle but still overcome it, that's how you win at Torchbearer. And for me, watching players learn that, figure that out, and essentially learn to cheat is something that I find really fun. I like putting the screws to the players and watching them get out of my tyrannical grasp.
Huh. So, what do those players love about those games? What do you see the other players enjoy?
Well, it's the triumph of coming from the bottom and working your way up, right? Like let's look at like 4th edition D&D or even Pathfinder. Like, you don't really see characters starting off as the crap of the earth, right? Like, we don't see games like Warhammer 40K or Warhammer Fantasy, anymore, where you're a rat catcher. Your skills are catch rat, right? And you work your way up to being a decent, well-skilled adventurer. And I think Torchbearer does a really good job throwing back to that, where it's like you start off with fairly pitiable skills, a couple of ways to kind of cheat the game, and if you can figure those out, you're going to be able to advance your character, and it's going to mean something, right? Like, second level in Torchbearer feels like an accomplishment. You don't suffer for nothing. And I think that's the thing. It's a challenge for players, and if your players like being mechanically challenged at a game, if they like working as a team and finding new ways to overcome problems using this really well-designed tool set, then they're going to like Torchbearer. If they try to not engage with the system, they're not really interested in learning the rules, that's where they're going to run into trouble, right? So for me, I see players really early on tweak on how the game works and what it's about, and they'll decide right away, by the first hour of playing, whether they're ready to really engage or just bail out, and it's not the game for them.
So you already covered it a little bit, but what are some other reasons people hate this game?
I think that it's tough because the audience for the game falls in sort of one of two categories, right? You're either already invested, you played Mouse Guard, you played Burning Wheel, you kind of get how Burning Wheel headquarters, how their games work, and this is just an extension of that. It's like Mouse Guard hard mode. Those players have nothing to hate about it, right? The other audience for the game is people who are interested in challenging games, and they have to learn how this particular game works. And if they're sort of stuck on that, like, we only play this version of D&D, any other version, why am I bothering? I already know my specific version of it that I like. They're going to hate this game just because it's different. And you see that, that's how nerds are, right? They see a game that looks kind of like what they think it is, and then it turns out to be different and they flip out. But the other thing, too, is I think people might not really get how Torchbearer works. They expect it to be easier on them than it is. So they'll hate it for making them earn their victories, right? If you want an easy win, you probably won't like Torchbearer that much.
All right. Is there anything else about this game that I've missed, Adam?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that for me that I really like about Torchbearer, and it's kind of hard to get across, in a hangout, is the physical artifact of the game is like gorgeous. Like Tor and Luke sunk most of the money they made on this game into making a physical book that like it's beautiful. If you ever get a chance, you see it on a shelf in a game store, give it a second, pick it up and flip through it. They've done an amazing job. The art is fantastic. The book looks like, your AD&D first edition player's handbook. It's brilliant.
Yes, I've seen pictures of it. It does look like a really nice book.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And Burning Wheel Gold is pretty much amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that that Luke doesn't do PDFs of Burning Wheel, and why they don't do print on demand is that these guys really care about the physical artifact. There's actually there's a set of cards for Torchbearer that help players track stuff like their conditions and light sources and stuff that, just like the book, are like crazy nice.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Adam, thanks for coming on to advocate for Torchbearer. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.